I love turkey. I have it every year at Thanksgiving and on my sandwiches throughout the year. So when I heard that they were making an affordable MP5 clone, I was all in. If you want to skip the intro, you can click here. Otherwise, enjoy.
We have a confirmed nuclear threat in the city. Nest teams are
Oi! Put it down now!
What's this all about, mate?
You're in possession of a biological weapon, put it down immediately!
Oh, mate, this ain't a biological weapon, it's just some Indian street food I picked up in Nottingham on my way home from my tech job.
Sorry, you don't know what you're doing!
I'm interested in trying out a little bit of cultural diversity.
I'm not gonna ask you again, put it down!
I'll give it a little stir for you and you can try some.
He's got a weapon! Bloody hell.
On your feet, soldier! We are leaving!
The ammunition provided for this video was brought to you by ARMALUX Defense Company. He reached out to me and he said, hey, here is 1,000 rounds of 9mm, have fun. And I said, hey, this is gonna go perfectly for my Mac 5 video. So huge thanks to ARMALUX for sending out the ammunition. If you go buy from him, I don't make any money off of that. It just helps him. And it says, thank you for sending the ammo out. So big shout out to ARMALUX Defense Co. All right, Hammy, did you get that?
Oh yeah, I got the shot.
If you're looking to pick up some affordable goodies like this Car 15 cheek riser, light covers, lens covers, kill flashes, or a variety of other different products, then consider checking out HAMMYPRINTS. He makes thousands of products at this point. He also makes a ton of organizational stuff and wall mounting stuff. So if you're looking to mount your blaster on the wall, drywall, slat wall, pegboard, grid wall, whatever you have, he has a mount for it. So very cool of him to sponsor this video, and all the information you need for him will be down in the description below. Here we have the Mac 5, the newest clone that has hit the market as far as MP5s go. It's a really good time for those of us that are interested in getting these kinds of guns. We have plenty of options now, and this is the most affordable one yet. So I snagged this for like $970. What is this gun? Okay, so this gun is imported by MAC, Military Armament Corporation. Now, if you're wondering, MAC, is that the same thing as like Mac 10, Mac 11? It actually is, but it's actually made in Turkey by a company called Murtsaf. Now, Murtsaf is a subcontractor, or they were a subcontractor for MKE. People are fairly certain that Murtsaf was making smaller parts for MKE. They're the ones who make the AP5, the AP5SD, the AP53, all those guns that Century Arms imports. Those are made by MKE in Turkey. So you basically have these two companies, MKE and Murtsaf, and they're kind of, Murtsaf is kind of working under, this means working under, I guess. It was working under MKE up here, and then they've kind of branched off now. Now they're making their own MP5s. There's actually some legal controversy going on in Turkey with these two companies kind of battling it out, because MKE is basically saying, hey, Murtsaf, you're copying our AP5s, and you can't do that. It's kind of a weird thing because the MP5 is an open source gun, so we won't get into the too nuanced details, but understand both these guns are coming from Turkey. The thing that's different is the MKE guns are manufactured on original H&K tooling. So you're getting a gun that's very reminiscent of like the 70s, 80s style of MP5s, because at some point H&K had traveled to Turkey and they established some factories there. They had, their plants there, they were making guns, but at some point H&K had left, gone back to Germany to make their guns there only, and the Turks were left with all the manufacturing, housing, tooling, all that stuff. So they still have it and they still produce guns for their military and to import into the United States. Now, Murtsaf is not making it on original H&K tooling. I've actually seen people confuse the MKE guns for, they hear, hey, Mac 5 made in Turkey. Oh, it's made on the original H&K tooling. That's actually not correct. It's made on new tooling to H&K specifications, whatever that means. So even though it's not original H&K tooling, this gun still fits all the H&K parts that any other clone would. Same specs, fit the magazines and the stocks and all the accessories that would fit on normal H&K or AP5, whatever, fits on the Mac. So to me, it's not a huge deal if it's not made on the original H&K tooling. If it all works with the same thing, who cares, right? When you guys are done with the little like gummies for ear protection, the in-ear stuff, do you guys bother to scrub the ear peanut butter off of it before using it again, or do you just kind of go with it? You guys ever seen that video, the SAS operators training?
They're taught the double tap, 2 shots fired in quick succession. This is standard CQB, close quarter battle training, for anti-terrorist work.
They're like doing a bunch of stupid stuff.
Firing range work is intensive.
Too high. Too high. So before we get into the specifics of the gun, what makes it different than some of the other clones, I will talk about how I set this thing up real quick. So iconic Surefire 628 light up top. These things are pretty hard to get. You gotta be like smart for sure. You gotta be able to like check Reddit and tax swap to get your hands on one of these. The light is really not that good. There's indoor lights and there's outdoor lights, right? There's some weapon lights that are so bright you really wouldn't wanna use them indoors because they just wash everything out, but they'd be fantastic outdoors. And then there's some lights that are really only good inside of a building. And this would be an example of that. When it's, you know, pitch black at night, this thing does a fine job, but if you have to go outside for any reason, it's just gonna be really weak. I think they sell upgrades for this because I believe this is actually just a Surefire, I think it's a Surefire 660, is that what it's called? I forget, my mind's actually slipping right now. But I kind of like the original incandescent lamp that it is. Then up top we have a cheap Amazon rail. This thing actually is like not even on here correctly. It's like canted over and kind of crooked. You can actually see it in some of the GoPro footage. I just threw it up there because I wanted to have like the Modern Warfare 2019 aesthetic, but I doubt this thing will hold zero because it was like 14 bucks on Amazon. I'm rocking for magazines. We just got the Mac magazines. We'll talk a little bit about what magazines work with this gun. Spoiler alert, it was everything. I got it inside the HAMMYPRINTS little mag coupler. And then of course the folding brace is probably one of the better ones as opposed to like the collapsible one. Now, why not throw a stock on this? Why not SBR it? Well, because it's a gun from Turkey that has had problems online, reported by other people, bolt gap issues, variety of different things. So I'm not just gonna go out the gate and SBR a Turkish gun because, you know, I kind of want to make sure it works before that. Now, putting 1,000 rounds through this gun, it has worked. Now, there were some malfunctions. I actually caught some on camera, but most of the malfunctions that I had, I can count on one hand, and the majority of those were my own doing. So typically, you know, I'd do a drill, I'd bring the gun up, fire, you know, gun runs dry, I go to do a mag switch, and then I wouldn't seat that magazine properly, or I would just try and, instead of slapping, I would come through and try and move this charging handle back a little bit, and maybe it just wouldn't catch the right way, or there wasn't enough force behind it. That's happened a few times to me. I think that's just improper charging handle manipulation. I'm letting it slingshot, and it should be slapped. All right, safety on this thing is not too great. That was the majority of my malfunctions. I think there was maybe one, I know that for sure there was one, at most two failures to extract. I don't know what that was. I used mainly the PMC 124 grain ammo that was provided for me by ARMALUX Defense, but I also did use a lot of remanufactured ammo I had. I had like this bag of remanufactured stuff. It was like aluminum case and random stuff that my father-in-law gave me, you know, a few years back. So it was just like in a Ziploc bag. So I threw some of that in there just to see if it worked. So it could have been that, or it could have just been break-in period. I'm not sure. It wasn't a repeatable thing, so I don't really count it as like a major issue because it's not something I could replicate. It was just a one-off kind of thing here and there. So why is this gun cheaper than like the AP5s? So the AP5s have cold hammer forged barrels and they're chrome lined. These are not cold hammer forged. They are button rifled, but they are still chrome lined. So there's, you know, that's fine if you care about that. So what's the difference between how these barrels are manufactured? So I wasn't really sure about this, so I did a little research. I'm going to give you the ESPO version of it. I encourage you to go do your own research if you're interested in how these, you know, the manufacturing process. But essentially button rifling is a much more inexpensive alternative than the cold hammer forging. You basically have your barrel. Where's my little stick at? Here's my little thing. Okay, so you basically have your barrel, you know, before that, it needs to get its rifling grooves in, so they need to, you know, get the rifling in. So they take this thing called a button, and the button has the grooves that it needs to indent into the barrel, and they shove it through the barrel with such force. They usually have like a big hydraulic machine that is pushing or pulling this thing called a button, which is just a stick with grooves on it, and it's basically going through the barrel, and it's moving with such, not moving with force, but it's being pushed with such force that it is actually making those grooves, not by cutting, but by moving the material out of the way almost. So that's why it needs so much incredible, you know, hydraulic force, is because it's literally like not carving, because it's not removing material. It is just making the indents with such force while not removing material. So it's just like forcing its way through and making those grooves. Now, cold hammer forging is a different process where you have your barrel and then you have basically another stick with grooves in it, like the mold, and it's sitting in there, and then a machine kind of smashes it. This is the hammer hammering process. So it kind of smashes it. If you've ever seen, it's like these little teeth are like chomping all around it, and it's chomping, 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 and what it's doing is it's forming that barrel around the mold to make the rifle grooves. While it's doing that, it's also compacting the material, the metal, on a molecular level. It is stacking the metal, so it makes the metal and the steel a little bit stronger. So that's why people typically opt for like a cold hammer forged barrel as opposed to something else. Button rifling is very, it's much more inexpensive, and that's probably like a lot of your PSA Freedom rifles are probably that. And then your cold hammer forging, you know, that's different materials, or I should say that's a different machine being used. It's a little bit more expensive. So typically it's understood that the cold hammer forged barrels are going to be stronger. They're going to last a little bit longer because again, that metal is being compacted. It's much stronger. For a 9mm, does that really matter? I'm not really sure whether a button rifle versus a cold hammer forge, if you're really going to notice it with a low pressure thing like a 9mm. But as far as this goes, and for what this particular gun is, I don't really care. So that's why they're saving a little bit of money. From what I understand, Mac actually does make a cold hammer forge barrel. It's just not imported to the United States, because at that point, what would be the point? You have a AP5 that's cold hammer forge, and then you have, basically a clone of that, another cold hammer forge. You'd have two guns at the same price point. And I think Mac, I should say Mertzaf, is trying to undercut MKE by bringing in those button rifle guns to sell it to the market because they're just a little bit cheaper. I'm out. Glock 17 Gen 1. Maybe we'll do a video on this bad boy here soon. 1987. This is not a reproduction. This is an original. We got this at a local store here a couple weeks back. They're running a sale. Snagged one of these bad boys for just under 400 bucks. Well, after tax, it was 400, but pretty good little steal, I think. So let's talk about some of the issues that people have reported with these guns. So right off the bat, one thing will be the magazines. There, at least one instance I've seen of the magazines, the feed lips getting broken, cracked, bent, whatever the case. I have not had that issue for at least these thousands of rounds. They've worked just fine, and I've used majority Mac magazines, the two that it came with. I did also use a straight magazine. It was an H&K, like an old 70s mag. It functioned fine with that. I used original H&K mags on it. It worked, and I even used, I think, the POF, the Pakistani mags. And when one gun, because when Hammy came out, he had a PRS MP5 custom build, and that thing did not like one of the POF mags very well. I took that mag, put it in the Mac, and it accepted it just fine. So I haven't had any reported issues with those magazines outside of what I said earlier, where I'd go to smack, or I would not seat the magazine correctly, and it would lead to a malfunction there. So what about fit and finish on the gun? Okay, so I've noticed we compared this to an H&K SP5, and the fit and finish is much nicer on those. Fitment being, when I took the end cap off of this and put the brace on, there's a little bit of wobble you can hear in the upper and lower. Does that bother me? Not really, because I have a lot of cheap ARs. I've had my fair share of inexpensive guns that have that rattle. I have the waffle stocks and the, Car 15 stocks that wobble. So I'm not it doesn't bother me that much, but it does not happen on the SP5 as opposed to this. Now, as far as the finish goes, you can tell that this gun is pretty shiny. Maybe you can't pick it up too well on the camera here, but this gun has a shiny finish to it. The SP5 does not. The SP5 has a much more matte look, feels much more sleek. I think I have some footage of it we can throw up. So when people talk about fit and finish, that's what they're talking about. It doesn't feel as good as an SP5 when you hold it in your hands, because this one has a little bit of wobble to it. The finish is a little bit shiny. You might not like that. To me, it doesn't really bother me that much, but some people might be bothered by that. I've been trying to cut some trees down, so things are half cut, let's just say, and that one back there fell on its own. 1738. Yeah, I'm like, hello. So do I recommend this gun? Well, it's hard for me to give you a total recommendation, because there have been issues reported out there, and one of those issues has been bolt gap. So bolt gap, if you're not familiar, is the gap of the bolt.
More specifically, bolt gap is the distance between the rear of the bolt head and the front of the bolt carrier when the bolt is in battery and the hammer is down.
So if you're new to roller blade, the HK style of weapons, there's something called a bolt gap that you should measure in your guns, and that is going to be done with a little tool like this. And essentially all you do is, I can kind of do it right now, so make sure your gun is clear. So you want to make sure your trigger's forward, and inside your mag well, you basically just take these gauges and you fit it into, there's a little gap in there. Fit it in and you say, okay, does that, you keep going until you can't go anymore. So right there is 0.5. So you just kind of fit the gauges and you keep sticking them in until you can't stick them in anymore.
So it's more like, you have all these gauges. It starts at 0.05 and then it goes to 0.10, then 0.15. And what you're doing is you're sticking one in at a time until you get to one that you can't fit in anymore. So for me, that was 0.55 was the last one that I could stick in before, you know, it wouldn't allow me to go up to 0.60. So that's kind of how it goes. I explained it kind of poorly, but that's what it is.
So the typical range for this in millimeters, I don't remember the inches one. This is a European weapon, so we're gonna use metric on it. 0.25 millimeters to 0.45 millimeters. If your bolt gap falls within that spec, you're perfect. If you are too much under that spec, so you're less than 0.25, you might run into extraction problems, failures to feed. You're having malfunctions with the gun pretty regularly and repeatably. If you have too much bolt gap, so this was clocking in at 0.55 when I first got it, you're going to have issues of, it might feel a little bit more harsher recoiling than it should be. So I'd much rather have over spec than under spec, because under spec the gun's like not usable. Over spec, it's usable, it's just not as tuned as it could be. I've seen some instances of people where they have it way too low, so they gotta send the gun back. I think there's a small part you can change in these that fixes it, but if I got a gun out of the box and the bolt gap was too little, I would just send it back, because I don't wanna be, you know, it's their responsibility, they should fix it. You should be getting a gun from the factory that functions, you know, without issues for at least a little bit. 1,000 rounds is not a ton of ammo, but as James Reeves says, you know, you're not gonna know if the gun is like perfect, good to go, but you are certainly gonna know if there's problems because you're gonna see it within those 1,000 rounds. And for this gun, I'd give it a 8 out of 10 as far as reliability and function goes. There were a couple of those failures to extract. I'm just not sure exactly what that was. If something I'm gonna keep an eye out in the future, but mostly the gun has been, you know, functioning just fine. And I would actually still rather choose a gun such as this over one of the PCCs that Palmetto State Armory is making. Like, I really don't care about like the Stizon or the AKV or the Jackal 9. You know, these guns are pretty much all just direct blowback, generic, you know, guns. I just don't care. AR9s, I'm not interested, unless it's the 635, those can be kind of fun, but I just have no interest in a lot of PCCs on the market, and I would rather take my chances with a little Turkish clone like this, because it looks cool, you know, it fits all the same HK parts that any other MP5 would, and the World Relate is a little bit of a smoother, softer feeling recoil. So, you know, I would rather have this than many of those other PCCs. You know, they have the, you know, the Kuna is out now. I'm not really sure how that is. That gun kind of looks ugly. It looks like a gun that the devs in Call of Duty would make when they are told that they have to make their own gun for the game because they're trying to avoid like copyright issues. That's what that gun looks like to me. So the MP5 is still pretty cool. 9mm is so inexpensive that it makes it really easy to go get repetitions with this gun and train with it. And it's very cool. That's another factor, is that just working the gun and doing mag changes and slapping the gun makes you feel pretty badass. So hopefully the short act passes and then we can throw a real stock on this. But I would like to get one of those collapsible stocks because this looks like a very sick little 90s build. So I appreciate you guys sticking around and watching the video, and I hope you guys have a good rest of your day.